Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I am a cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage counseling, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550. And our website is lifecoachdanamzalike.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our sixth episode of season 5, a very special guest, Rob Dubin. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Rob, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan. I talk about the other side of mental health, the positive side of it, the how to be healthy mentally, how to live a happy and fulfilling life. And my story briefly is I was a filmmaker. I had a very successful career traveling around the world making movies. And after a bit of a existential life crisis, my wife and I were lost in a storm and given up for dead. And we were out in the storm for 5 days and we survived, but we started asking ourselves a lot of the bigger questions that I think are similar to what people are asking during the pandemic now. Am I happy? Is my life what I want? Is it going where I want? And so a couple of years after that, we retired, and I was only 42 years old, and we took off and we spent the next 17 years living on a sailboat sailing around the world.
Wow.
And yes, and as we before we left, we had been very involved in the world of sailing and spent a lot of time with the millionaires and the billionaires that go after the America's Cup and the expensive sailboat races. And then moments later, we were sailing in third world countries and sharing our lives with these, very poor villagers, dirt floor, grass shacks. And what I found is that in both groups, there were some people that were happy and some that were unhappy. And so I started focusing on, and we were out there really to make ourselves happy was our goal. So I started focusing on the kind of the commonalities that I saw in people that were happy, that were unhappy. And I was aware that I had always been a really, really happy person. And so when I got back and I started speaking to groups about our travel, I talked really more about the happiness voyage than the actual sailing voyage to visit these other 100 countries. And over time, I developed a kind of a framework that I felt was important for people to find happiness. And when I started speaking more on it, I thought, gee, do I really know what the hell I'm talking about? And so I started reading people like yourself who had training, psychologists and this fairly new field of positive psychology. And I found out two quite interesting things. One is that what they had identified were literally exactly the same steps that I identified and that I teach. And one of the early researchers said that half of our happiness is basically baked into our DNA. And she did studies with identical twins and things like that. And they actually did determine that much of our happiness is baked into our DNA. But still, even if it's not baked into your DNA, there's still half of it that you can change yourself. And even the part that is baked in, other people, I can teach that to other people. So I can teach this entire framework and show people a way to live happier, more fulfilling lives. And I'm lucky that I've been one of those the people that have it baked into their DNA. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
Very, very interesting. So, for those who are not, who it's not baked in their DNA, you said that the other 50% they can change it. But is it environmental? Is it because if something happens outside of their control, can they dictate if they're going to be happy or unhappy?
It's kind of, I'll unpack two questions there, and one of them you would have much more insight than I do. But this idea of outside of our control, we have this the term, I'm sure, locus of control. It's a term that is common in your field, I know. And it's whether we feel we control our environment or it controls us. And I have found when I teach these steps of happiness this idea of locus of control, of do I control my environment or is it outside of me? If you don't believe you can control your environment, you can't. Self-improvement is an entire field of endeavor that is not available to you.
Right.
So the first thing that I work on with people is trying to move their locus of control from external to internal. And I have a story that I tell about a friend. I was in Phoenix with this woman, and we were both going. She worked at a company that was doing some work for me, and her car broke down. So for several days, we drove together to her business or to the company. And I was driving home with her and in my car, and we were driving back, and it's these long, long streets in Phoenix. The blocks are about half a mile long. And we're driving along, and she said, "Wow, you're so lucky. All the lights seem to be turning green just when you get to them." And I kind of looked at her. I couldn't, I was just sort of dumbfounded. And I said, "Well, it's not luck. I know that if I go not during rush hour when there's not a lot of other cars, and if I drive at exactly 42 miles an hour, the lights will all change green."
Yes.
And so we had these two opposing views of life. And so I knew that I could control the outcome. And because of the way I viewed the world, I had a whole lot more green lights in my entire life than she does, because she doesn't view the world that way. So that's number one, is being able to exert that control of your life. And then when you asked about your circumstances, the positive psychologists, people like yourself that are professionals in that industry that study it, they have said that your circumstances is really only 10% of your happiness. And your circumstances would be your socioeconomic status, your job, your relationships, your finances, things like that. And clearly that's what we found, because as I said, we found barefoot villagers that if they didn't go out in the garden today and dig up a potato they planted, they weren't going to eat. And then we spent time with billionaires that were, doing the America's Cup. And like I said, both groups had some happy and some unhappy people.
So you practice the laws of attraction every single day of your life, Rob, because if you go back to the thought process, like if you look at the example of the green light, maybe you said to yourself, it's not just pure coincidence or synchronicity that you drove at a certain speed and you knew that you're going to hit every single green light. You just said to yourself, and it was done not even consciously, it just happened. So again, it's what you perceive that you receive.
Absolutely. We have this mistaken concept that actually it comes from the Declaration of Independence. The second line in the Declaration of Independence refers to the pursuit of happiness. And we think it's something you have to pursue. And we also have this notion that, again, that positive psychologists have proven is incorrect. The idea that we have to succeed to be happy. And in fact, it's the other way around. If you make a decision to be happy and then you do the things that happy people do, the personality traits and the habits, which are things I teach, if you decide to be happy and do those things, you access more creativity, more charisma, more flexibility, resilience, all those things that then allow you to be more successful in whatever your endeavors are, both relationship, career, whatever it happens to be. So if you decide first to be happy, then you will be successful.
Then you basically are telling the listeners that you have to do the reverse engineering of happiness. You start by the result and you go back to the origin.
Well, it's yes. The result is only the result if you happen to see it that way. If you just see being happy can be your natural state, it's not a result, it's just who you are. So when these things that I teach, this framework, when you do all those things, you just suddenly notice one day that happiness is who you are.
But okay, so I agree with you 100%, Rob. But then how can we change the educational system that teaches kids from grade one all the way to college, whatever it is, that if you do well in school, you're going to get a good job, you're going to get paid well, and then you're going to have your house with a white picket fence, you're going to have a family, two kids, whatever it is, and then you will reach happiness. But then there's what we call the principle of causality, cause and effect. So how can you change people's mindset to look at the complete opposite direction of what they've been taught for so many years?
You've nailed exactly the critical first step to making any of this happen. And it is funny because we have been all taught that all along, that you do all those things you said and then happiness is the result. But in my introduction, I mentioned that my wife and I had this survival experience that made us question life. Well, that's what the pandemic has been for millions and millions of people. Your podcast is probably more relevant today than it would have been 4 years ago, because the number of people, there was a small segment of the population that was interested in self-improvement, that wanted to be happier. They would have listened to your podcast 5 years ago, and they would go to Tony Robbins seminars and things like that. But that number has now expanded to a gigantic chunk of the population. And I actually talk with businesses because this great resignation is affecting businesses so much, and the businesses haven't yet nailed down the cause. Good HR departments always focus on employee happiness at work. But the question people are now asking is not how can I be happy at work? They're asking how can I be happy in my life? And so that's the approach I bring to what I do with businesses. But it's the same thing that so many people are now asking that question, how can I be happy in life? And hopefully the ones that listen to your podcast, that listen to what I do, that listen to all the people like us in this field, will start realizing it's not this pursuit of the white picket fence that suddenly happiness happens. And that's what all of us grew up with. We thought if we did all the things, we went to the college and got the job and the picket fence, happiness would happen to us like lightning striking. And it doesn't work that way. You first have to decide to be happy, then you do the things, the habits and the skills of happiness, and then you become happiness. And all those skills, as I said, make you more successful.
Beautiful. You actually did bring up a very, very good point, Rob, or actually a statement that was saying about the great resignation in all the business that suffers from the loss of many employees that basically just awakened. Is it not just a resignation, but more a great awakening? Because for many, many years, people were so dumbfounded and just they followed the rules, they followed what they were supposed to do, they followed to get a job, to follow to be able to pay the bills, etc. And then this year and a half or 2 years of isolation, it brought them to look at their lives, to be able to perceive that what they thought was a happy life was completely the opposite. So now that people are awakened, how can business owners, especially the listeners who own businesses, how can they keep their employees happy if HR is really responsible for doing so, and for them to get them more involved in the business, get them more involved? It's not just about money. You could pay someone 200,000 a year. They're still not going to get happy or be happy. So what are the strategies that you would give to those business owners?
Exactly. First let's talk about what won't work, because traditionally, more compensation, better benefits, those were the things that HR offered. And because the work employees' paradigm was still back to the white picket fence, those things worked. Mm-hmm. Then in the last half a dozen years, forward-thinking HR departments have done a lot of research and surveys on this concept of engagement, but it's engagement making employees happier at work. And so they're still in that mindset of doing engagement, and it misses the target because employees aren't saying, how can I be happier at work? They're saying, how can I be happier in life? So really, the key is to teach your employees how to be happy. And the skills that I teach of happiness, they're no different than, you went to school to become a psychologist. People go to school to become engineers or nurses or doctors. Those are skills that need to be taught. And happiness is the same way. It's a skill that none of us ever learned in school, and it can be taught. So if we just put our nose to the grindstone and hope that lightning is going to strike us and one day we'll be happy, it's no more likely that lightning's going to strike you and make you happy than it's going to strike you and make you a doctor or an engineer or a nurse without going to school. So employers need to bring people in and do programs with their employees that teaches them the skills of happiness. They need to send every one of their employees to a Tony Robbins seminar or what I do or something like that. And I don't mean to be comparing myself to Tony. He's one of my mentors and I'm not even remotely in the same league, but you get the idea.
I completely do. Yes.
And one of the things you mentioned in our pre-talk was people have this story in their head about their failures and they keep replaying it. And one of the first traits that I have identified in people that are happy, and that again, all this is supported by the scientific research, is you need to reinvent your own story. And so when we moved from our 2,800 square foot home onto a 350 square foot sailboat, we had to get rid of a lot of stuff.
Yes.
You know, the space on a sailboat, 300 feet, is very limited. You can only take with you things that are going to help you sail better, live better in your life on the boat, be safer, but you don't have room for anything extraneous. And that is a perfect metaphor for life because we're all carrying this baggage that's not going to get us to who we want to be. And in fact, if we put it all on the boat's going to sink. So we have to throw it overboard and get rid of that baggage and just take with us the things that are going to help us in the future. So one of the things I teach is to rewrite your story. We all have some negative story that we've told a million times, both to ourselves and to other people, about why we can't get ahead, why we're not succeeding, why we're not good, whatever. And you have to just rewrite that story. And, you know, our brains answer questions for us. So if I say, why am I a failure? Why does nobody love me? Why can't I get ahead? All those negative questions, my brain is going to come up with an answer, whether it's true or not. It's going to come up with some kind of answer.
Right.
And instead, if I asked it questions like, how am I so awesome? Why does everybody love me? How can where else have I succeeded in the past? How can I succeed in the future? My brain is going to come up with answers for those questions. So if you ask yourself positive, empowering questions and you rewrite that story of that negative experience, you know, the worst experience I can think of in my life it was total public humiliation. I won't tell the whole story, but I bombed making a presentation in front of all of my potential clients when I was brand new in business, and it was total public humiliation, and it resulted in me having to pivot my business in a new direction, which led to unbelievable success. And so I rewrote, you know, it took me a while. For a long time, that story was just nothing but pain. But eventually, I did things with the story. I went in a new direction because I kind of had to. And now I tell that story, and it's my greatest play. You know, it led to my success. And so if you find some positive thing that came out of your story, and if there's nothing positive, there's at least a lesson you learned from it. And so take the lesson and move on. And when you think about the story in the future, don't feel the pain of it all over again. You know, we've all burned our hand on the stove. If the lesson we learned is I should never eat hot food again, our life is not going to be very fulfilling. If the lesson we learned is stoves are hot, and I can walk by a stove in the future without feeling any pain in my life, that's probably a better lesson. So that's the first thing I talk about, is how to reinvent your story, rewrite your story, and tell it in your own head enough until that becomes the story for you on that experience.
Basically, it's just, you know, start learning to believe in yourself. Because as you mentioned earlier, you talked about the imposter syndrome, which when you start being, you know, giving those presentations, you were saying to yourself, who will listen to me? Who am I to be able to teach people to be able to reach their happiness? Now, obviously, if we go back to your sailing journey, okay, Ram, and you said that you spoke to people who are like multi-billionaires with yacht the size of like the Donald Trump Tower, and and we have other people that just lives in a village, and those people are happier than those who actually are multi-billionaires. They find happiness from within and not from without. And the thing is that we have to realize that we're not taking any of this wealth with us, like after we depart. And the thing is
Absolutely.
that when we see, for example, those who have suffered and who have gone through very difficult times in their lives, how can themselves start learning to change their story? I mean, it's hard to say to someone who have gone through medical issues, either cancer, whatever it is, who have lost their family or lost their wife, lost their home, lost everything. How can you, Rob, tell them, change your story, everything's going to be fine? That's going to be like a big, I would say, not necessarily insult, but more of kind of like, well, snap out of it kind of thing. Will they be able to believe in themselves enough to make the change?
Um, I don't really feel qualified to answer that question. I'm not in your space. And I talk about, when I do talk about actually the story thing, I address that. I say, if you have a story that is so painful that you can't get there, you need professional help. I mean, I know what my limitations are. If people are in that space, they need a psychologist or psychiatrist, somebody like yourself who can move them past that. Uh, that's just not my field of expertise, and I wouldn't wander into that arena. And I do say that actually in my talks, right in the workbook that I have that goes with it. Right after I talk about telling your story, I have basically a paragraph that says that same thing. And they're just things that need professional help, and that's your field, and you're good at it. And I wouldn't try and venture into there. But I will say one thing. You mentioned about people need to believe in themselves, and that's certainly a part of it. So most of my stories, I were things that came to me while we sailed, and I have, uh, they were things that came to me as we sailed along. But my first insight, I guess, is about believing in yourself, getting your sense of self-worth from yourself. Your listeners can't see, but you can see that I'm completely bald. But since I'm in my 60s, that's not a big deal. But what you wouldn't know is that I started going bald when I was in kindergarten. And when I was in kindergarten, I got these, a couple inch silver dollar sized bald spots on my head. And in kindergarten, it was no big deal. My friends would want to feel the smooth bald spot on my head, and then we'd go play marbles or whatever kindergartners do. But by the time I got into fourth grade, I was getting teased unmercifully. And in those days, we didn't have any of the anti bullying campaigns we have now. And basically, you just teased and you took it. And one day I was on the playground. I was in fourth grade, and these two sixth graders started calling me old baldy or whatever and teasing me. And I kind of lost it. I got this tunnel vision, and I ran at one of these kids. I heard this roaring in my ears. I ran at him with my little 10-year-old fist swinging as hard as I could swing them. And I don't remember what happened for the next couple minutes, but when the gym teacher, who was the playground monitor, picked me up a minute later, both of these kids were lying on the ground with bloody noses and black eyes and holding their stomachs, and I didn't have a mark on me. And of course, for the next day, I was everybody's hero because nobody liked the bullies. So I got a lot of positive feedback for what I had done. But then the important thing happened, and here's the lesson from it. Somebody said to me, and I don't know if it was a teacher or my parents or maybe another fourth grade student, but somebody said to me, "You don't even like those kids. Why do you care what they think of you?" And literally from that moment in fourth grade, I realized that all my sense of self-worth comes from myself. What other people think of me is none of my business. I don't look to others to get self-approval. And so literally since that age, I have lived authentically as who I am for what I stand for. I figured out what my values were along the way of life, and I live my values. I don't look to other people for affirmation. So when I said I'm 42 years old in the prime of my career, and I think I'll chuck everything and go sailing, My parents really didn't think that was really a great idea, nor did they think when I went to film school instead of being a lawyer, that was a great idea. But all those things I've done in my life I could do because I keep my own counsel and I get my sense of self-worth from right here.
Beautiful. And do you feel now, after you this awakening when you were in fourth grade, you said that all through your life you were like a happy person. How did you maintain this happiness? I mean, I'm sure that you went through some very difficult challenges in high school, in college, and all. But how did you not let those events affect you the way it affects others?
When I was experiencing them in my younger years, I really couldn't say. I mean, it's only that when I started thinking about this happiness journey and I was on the boat and I started looking back that I could see I had always been that way. If you had asked me how I did it, I couldn't have. At the time, I did it, but I don't know how I did it. I couldn't have taught anyone else. Now I can look back and recognize. For instance, if you ask me what my superpower is, it's the fact that I was bald when I was a kindergartner. And I can tell you, going through puberty and dating when you were bald was not a really positive experience. But now I realize that's made me the strong person I am. And back to your journey for cancer survivors or people who've been through terrible trauma. While I can't counsel them, I can show them I had miniature speed bumps in my life. I wouldn't compare being bald to the things that I know so many people have gone through. But I can at least show you here's the little tiny speed bump I had in my life. Granted, it doesn't compare to what you've been through, but here's the story that I now tell about that. I mean, being bald is my superpower for sure.
Well, that's actually is something that will definitely inspire the many listeners out there. So, if you would give any piece of advice to everyone who are trying to find happiness, who are trying to because this is the happiness journey. So everyone is actually going through their journey. What would be the best advice for them so they could actually start taking a step forward to be able to start getting there or reaching? Well, we'll not say it's a destination, but reaching whatever they have to reach.
So I'll give three quick pieces of advice. The first one is decide to be happy. And the way to help you decide that is to ask positive, empowering questions. And then here's something you need to do for the next 30 days is write towards the end of each day, I sit down and I write 6 things I'm grateful for. And they can be very simple things. I mean, I'm grateful for the fresh snow today. I'm grateful that I got outside on my bike. I'm grateful that my kid had a good day at school. They can be small little things. They don't need to be that you are the king of the world. Just small little things. But write down 6 things that you're grateful for. But you have to spend 5 minutes on this. And it may only take you a minute to write the 6 things, but you have to spend the other 4 minutes focusing on those things. Why do they make you feel grateful? How do you feel? What feelings can you access? And how does use your senses? How does being grateful for this look and sound and feel and smell and taste? So 5 minutes is all you for the next 30 days. Try that. And then the other thing is go after your dreams. And we find that all of us have to be progressing in life in some way, shape, or form to be happy. So I guess if you can be grateful, if you can contribute to others every day in some little way, shape, or form. If you just look around and look at your friends and notice something special about them today and offer a compliment, but it's got to be a sincere compliment. And so if you can contribute to others, do something that's gratitude oriented every day, and do any little thing to push your dream forward. If your dream is to take a trip to Europe, spend 5 minutes Googling Europe on Google and read something about a place you want to go. But push your dreams down the road. Just do a little thing each day to push them a little farther down the road.
That is beautiful. So where can our listeners find you, Rob?
They can find me on my website at robdubin.com. And a couple of things that I offer to anybody that's there is I have a 4 or 5 page PDF people can download that explains the steps I took to retire at 42 years old. So how to think about money and financial strategies and things like that. And they can just fill out a form and download, and it'll send them a link to download that. My wife and I have been married for 40 years, and we spent 15 years working together in business and then 17 years together on a small sailboat. And so people always ask us about our relationship. And we have another PDF that people can download about this relationship strategies that have worked for us. And then there's a couple other things there. So if they fill out a form, they'll get a list of the PDFs that they can download. And hopefully that'll be a value to people.
Beautiful. Wow, you definitely inspired me. That's for sure. And that is all the time that we have for today's podcast, Rob. I do appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible story. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 5 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories, just like the one that you listened to today. And now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Everyone has inside of him a piece of good news. The good news is that you don't know how great you can be, how much you can love, what you can accomplish, and what your potential is. We tend to be more comfortable around bad news, and our energy is drawn to the negative instead of the positive. Changing your mindset can be a start of a great journey where you start believing in your potential and your purpose in life. Try it, it really does work. My name is Dr. Dan Emzalai, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.